Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this week's Motor Trade Radio podcast. It's in association with eBay Motors Group. It is Saturday the 7th of December, and you're joined by myself, Philip Nothard.
And me, Curtis Hutchinson.
So before we get to the week's headlines, Curtis, we have a very special guest talking to us this morning. I'm going to go through some highlights from his group's recent published year ends and share his thoughts on how Q4 is planning out and the challenges that face the sector in 2020.
Yes, Phil, this morning we're delighted to welcome Mark Lavery, CEO of Cambria Automobiles. Now, Mark launched Cambria back in 2005, growing it into a £657 million turnover company, currently rated 25 in the AM100. And just to give you the listeners a bit of a background, Mark started his career back in 1984 as a service receptionist in a Ford dealership that was in Liverpool before moving into sales and becoming general sales manager. He then joined AFG, which is a name from the past that will be familiar to many listeners this morning, becoming its youngest general manager, running a Nissan site in Rochdale. He then moved to Hartwell in '94 as a GM and ran the group from 2001. After that, he was operations director at Reg Vardy before launching Cambria, which celebrates its 15th anniversary next year. So good morning and welcome to the Motor Trade Radio podcast, Mark.
Morning, gentlemen, and thank you very much for the invitation.
So, morning, Mark, and welcome. So, your first time on the podcast, and hopefully, if everything goes well this morning, you can come back again. So we are recording, so we'll be fine. So, really, as we mentioned earlier, you know, your recent results to the end of August came out, and your revenues were up 4.4% to 657 million, and an underlying pre-tax profit was up by 25% to 12.3 million. So how much of an impact did the strategic growth of your luxury brand businesses have on that result? And how do you expect to see Cambria accelerating the growth of this part of the business?
Morning, Phil.
Right.
A couple of things here just to note. In the previous year, gents, we went through a sort of fairly major restructuring, which led to the closure of our Blackburn Motor Park location, which had Volvo, Renault, Fiat and Alfa Romeo. We obviously needed to close existing franchises to accommodate new franchises as well. So bringing Bentley and Lamborghini into Chelmsford meant the closure of two existing franchises. Again, bringing Bentley and Lamborghini into Tunbridge Wells meant the closure of two existing franchises and to start again. So to all intents and purposes, Phil, when we went through the process, you've basically got to shut the business for 6 months while we get up to latest corporate ID. As we're doing those build projects, of course, we're not selling any cars, we're not selling any service hours, we're not selling any parts. So don't get me wrong, we're delighted with the results from last year, but I'm not actually sure if it's a fair comparison because a closure of one location, two big locations shut for a period of 6 months. And of course, we weren't aware that in both cases, to all intents and purposes, they were startups. Once the building work was completed, you don't actually then get a chunk of stock and start selling it. In Bentley and Lamborghini terms, you get some operational stock to open the door, and typically it's 6 months delay for order to delivery. In Lamborghini terms, in certain cases, you're looking at 18 months for a Lamborghini Urus back then, and we're still 16 months out. So the results are good. The team worked very hard. In McLaren and Bentley's case, in McLaren's case, we started talking to them in 2010. and it's taken us 8 years to get it over the line. And in Bentley's case, we started talking to them in 2012, and again, it's taken us 6 years to get it over the line. So obviously delighted with the 3 new brands to the group. They've made a fundamental paradigm shift in contribution terms, but bear in mind that the previous period, there was sort of 7-8 months of nothing going through those businesses. So these are... they've made a change. Of course, they've made a change. The profit we make on the amount of on each new car we sell has fundamentally changed. And luxury brands, I think, don't feel the pain like everybody else does. And I think in uncertain times, it's just been a real benefit for us, and we're pleased with it. They're very mature businesses, so that's going to take a little bit of time for them to grow. There was no database to speak of. And I think as they mature over the next 3 to 4 years, we're excited about their potential to really help the group grow.
So do you think it's, I mean, just leading on from that, sorry, Curtis, just is it a case that, because like you say, you've started these conversations back in 2010 and 2012, and you sort of, do you think it is just, great that actually, we're in this political position now and everything else, that actually you just, by chance, and I say by chance, it's not by chance because it was a strategic decision to move into that, but actually from a timing perspective, you happen to be moving into these brands that aren't as affected by the current economic climate as some of the other would be?
Phil, you've hit it absolutely spot on. It's a culmination of a number of years' work that has come together at the right time, and we've enjoyed a significant benefit from it last year.
Now, Mark, against that backdrop, yes, a good year for luxury, but how did the volume business perform during the year, and how does volume actually fit in with your future strategic thinking?
I think twofold, Curtis. I think the volume businesses are finding it tougher, particularly with the new emissions regulations on the way around the corner in 2020, and of course becoming more, well, you can only describe them as draconian because there's only one continent that's taken the approach to passenger car emissions, and that's Europe, to a degree playing into the hands of other, APAC, Asia Pacific hasn't done that, North America hasn't done that. So I think there's a period of time where there's going to be significant pain for the volume manufacturers. Obviously, huge amounts of money going into R&D across all segments. So I think the next 2 to 3 years have potential to be interesting. From a volume point of view, some of our brand partners found it really difficult and suffered during that period. Others did really rather well. And I think we're in that position, gents, where I think it's really important that the OEMs and the retailers work closely together. I think during the period of change with new emissions legislation, political uncertainty, and the declining market, those brands that take a more pragmatic approach to dealer standards and are very proactive in dealing with aging retailer inventory, they're the ones who are getting the benefits. Those who are putting more dealer standards in and making it more complicated for us to do business with our guests, they're the ones who are finding it really difficult. From Cambria's point of view, our volume division is a significant part of the group. We don't see that changing. And actually, Curtis, I'd go as far as to say the other side. I think there'll be real opportunity to grow in the volume space. I think some of the smaller operators are going to be squeezed out. I think some of the bigger operators with the bigger overheads are going to find it difficult. So we see volume as being an area where there's potential real opportunity coming down the pipe.
Yeah, and I mean, looking at your figures, and you touched on it a little bit earlier around that sort of the luxury brands and the impact some of that's had on in terms of profit per unit. But looking at the figures that came out last week, and what was certainly interesting was that the rise in average profit per unit across the group of 40.3%. Now, we know that obviously new car sales, you reported that new car sales down 11.8 and used cars were down 4.9. But was this in conjunction, obviously, with your luxury brands? Was it a strategic decision to actually, focus on that profit per unit, not chase the volume? what was the strategic approach to that?
Phil, we've always got to chase volume. It's our job. Doesn't matter whether we're in the high luxury segment, the premium segment, or the volume segment. It's our job to chase the volume for our OEM partners, to make sure we keep our workshops full, make sure that we provide the parts that fall off the guests' cars. The big dynamic shift in group earnings was, if you look at the new high luxury segment division, so McLaren, Bentley and Lamborghini, in the year before, between those four franchises, we delivered 64 cars. In the last reporting period, that same division did 188 cars. So it's a threefold increase in volume. You're not discounting a Bentley, a Lamborghini, and a number of McLarens. So instead of making a smaller amount of money selling a volume car, you're making a big amount of money, because particularly in that segment, everybody wants the latest product.
Yeah.
And exclusivity leads to desirability, leads to profitability.
Yeah.
If you can walk in and you can take one off the shelf, you expect a big discount. If you walk in, you're prepared to take the time, which you will, because it's exclusive. And by being exclusive, it makes it desirable. By it being desirable, you're prepared to pay more for it. It actually works twofold. So obviously that sort of threefold increase in volume, and at profit terms of, well, in that division, it was £20,000 per new car that we sold. It's a huge paradigm shift for a group of our size. Now, also taking your point about used volume was down. On a like-for-like basis, used volume was actually up, Phil, by just over 1.5%. But we're making more money out of every car we sell because of that luxury mix shift.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Because you're selling used Lamborghinis, you're selling used Bentleys, you're selling used McLarens. You make more money out of them. In gross margin, it shrinks because obviously you're investing more capital in the first place. But in actual pounds, shillings and pence terms, you're making more. So again, it's sort of a number of years' work coming to fruition at the right time, and we've certainly enjoyed the benefit of that.
Yeah, and I suppose not really being able to give a true like-for-like balance year on year into it, because like you said right at the start of the show there, that you closed some businesses, which was a removal of some volume sites to put the luxury and invest in the luxury. So again, the shift in terms of ratio of your luxury to your volume has shifted on a year on year basis. Correct. As well. So again, your PPU as an average across the business would have changed accordingly. Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely, it's fundamental, and you've called it absolutely spot on.
Now, Mark, you've talked about new car sales and used car sales. What about after sales? Because revenues were up 4.3%, gross profit was up 500,000. What stood out for you in terms of after sales over the course of the period?
Being candid, Curtis, what stood out for me is it's not good enough, because we built some huge facilities. So our Jaguar Land Rover Arch facilities, of course, these are 25-bay workshops. In the new businesses in Lamborghini, Bentley and McLaren, they're incredibly immature, and it takes time to, not just sell the product, but then the product's got to come back to you for maintenance. So again, that's a period of years. I think we've got extended service intervals, declining car park. I think after sales is an area, as an industry, that we can all make a lot more efficient. And being candid, if we don't, our returns are going to get squashed anyway. I think it's an area that we're still, as an industry, quite backward-looking and historical, rather than what the guest requires, and make it easier to do business with us. And certainly from Cambria's point of view, I don't believe we're at our optimal number yet. Don't get me wrong, we've made some progress, but there's still a lot more to come there.
So You mentioned, I mean, we've touched on it at the start in terms of some of the restructuring and changes, but obviously in terms of 2018, 2019, I mean, you've obviously invested a lot of capital into new sites, haven't you? I mean, you've got Peugeot, Vauxhall, Warrington, Lamborghini, Tunbridge Wells, JLR, McLaren, Aston Martin, Hatfield, your Suzuki at Maidstone. I think I've got the most of them right. But in terms of looking forward, because you mentioned it about this relationship between manufacturers and the dealers, a closer working relationship, that brand partners, and how's things looking now for 2020? Obviously, you're not potentially going to share everything in terms of the podcast because these are, but how's the pipeline looking for 2020? Because obviously 2018, 2019 has been a busy year for you guys. Is it looking the same for 2020 at the minute, or?
Well, there's a couple of big developments that we've got planned as an organisation. So, sort of the next big one for us, Phil, is Brentwood. Now, Brentwood, we're planning to relocate Lamborghini and Bentley from Chelmsford into our Brentwood location, which will free up capacity at Chelmsford to put new brands on there alongside Vauxhall. Potentially Land Rover joining with us alongside Jaguar in Brentwood, Aston Martin with another high luxury brand alongside it. So if everything goes to plan, we should be going for planning Q1 next year. How long that process takes, we've bought a plot. It's closer to the M25. All being well, there'll be 6 brands all in a line. For us, it will be incredibly high profile. Brentwood, 11 out of the 12 years that we've owned it with Aston Martin and Jaguar there, has been our most successful location. So it makes sense to move more brands there, obviously just off the M25, really quite excited about it. But I think we'll probably break ground back part of next year. That's probably a year's build, so we're excited about that. We've got to relocate our Aston Martin business in Birmingham. So from the current location on Balsall Common, we bought a new site just outside Solihull on the A34 next to Audi there. So we're excited for the potential of that too. You'll have seen on record I've talked about Aston Martin and the DBX and the impact that'll have for the brand. I think it'll be a game changer for Aston Martin. You've probably seen their share price this morning. One or two people are beginning to understand the potential impact of an SUV to the Aston Martin brand. I think it'll be a game changer for us and for the brand, so we're excited about that. And then, as you'd imagine, we're in ongoing discussions with various parties who are considering their futures, and we an uncertain market, gents, just brings real opportunity. And because we've managed our cash quite well and we don't carry a lot of debt, and let's be clear, we're not that big. We can be quite agile, and we see 2020 as a real year of opportunity for the group again. So we don't intend to be resting on our laurels. We see ourselves very much on the upward trajectory and continuing that trend, Phil.
Yeah, I can see that. In terms of, is there sort of, can you shed a light on any new brand partners, or there's obviously probably.
What, you expect me to blast that out on this?
No, not at all.
Yeah, give us an exclusive, Mark.
Yeah, what a good idea.
I don't think that'd go down well for your future relationship with the brand.
Listen, we see a world of opportunity. There's a bunch of brands that we'd aspire to have in the group, and we're very much open for business, and we intend to take advantage of the uncertainty. So am I going to name any exclusives for you? No.
But if anybody's listening, I can pass you Mark's mobile, and he's obviously open for opportunities. Any brands listening that they don't always
represent. That's really helpful on a Saturday morning.
Yes.
we will.
Okay. Okay, Mark, final question for you. We'll be covering the November registration figures in this morning's show. The market was down 1.3% for the month, which brings year-to-date down 2.7%. How do you think Q4 is actually looking for Cambria specifically and the market generally? And also any thoughts on the challenges the sector faces in 2020?
I think there's a couple of things there, Curtis. I think any time when there's a general election on, it makes the electorate a little more nervous, and I think that's certainly hurting a little bit. I think October was obviously down further than November, and what we'd all hope is that there's some clarity post-election. I think the challenges for Q4, of course, we've got the new emission regulation coming around the corner from the 1st of January. We've got a number of cars that we hold in stock, that our OEM partners hold in stock, that they need to get on the road in Q4 because they don't want to pay the fines in Q1 next year. So I predict there'll be some pre-registration activity, and there'll be some nearly new low mileage cars that will be on the road in Q4. I think next year, I think it's a start of, well, it's not the start, it's a continuation of a massive period of change. Some of the penalties that the OEMs potentially could face are extraordinary. And I think there's not been a lot of thought gone into it by European Parliament. And I think when you look at some of the price increases being put through, I know one volume manufacturer is talking anywhere between £1,500 and £4,000 per car, and at the same time reducing dealer margins substantially. Now, that's pretty unusual when you consider the uncertainty in the market. So I personally feel that there'll be a lot of activity. Maybe a lot's unfair, but there'll be some activity on pre-registration to get these cars onto the roads. I think next year consumers will look at price points and take a bit of a gulp. And actually, I think used cars will become critically important because of those sort of price increases. I think that's going to have an impact on the market. Now, it'll take a period of time for that to be digested. And I suppose it goes back, gents, to what we discussed earlier. And as much as it's just really important to work closely with our brand partners to find the right way to maintain as many sales as we possibly can, and make sure that we look after the guests and the experience we provide for our guests. And I think that that emissions legislation will become more and more relevant, and that uncertainty will mean that we've all got to stay an awful lot closer on working together and in partnership to see our way through this in the short and medium term.
Yeah, I mean that figure. I mean, there's a figure bandied around that I think there's a forecast fine potential of about 30 billion euros or something being bandied around that the manufacturers could face. It's it's ridiculous figures, isn't it, when you actually look into it?
Phil, they've gone nuts. You probably saw the article in the FT with literally tens of thousands of German auto workers being removed. Now, I think that tens of thousands will become hundreds of thousands.
Yeah.
And if the politicians aren't careful, you've got to be careful what you wish for.
Yeah.
And I think that there is a climate change emergency. That's a given. And it's man-made activity. That's also a given. But let's find a way to make this work collectively. Let's not just look at zero tailpipe emissions, because actually the tailpipe emissions are doing some damage, but when you consider where we're getting some of the natural ore from, particularly cobalt, to go into a battery electric vehicle, 85% of the world's cobalt is held in the People's Democratic Republic of Congo, with 4 and 5 year old kids going down a mine to get it out of the ground. That's not in the planet's interests at all. And the politicians haven't taken any of that into account. For me, it's whole life damage to Mother Earth, not zero emission tailpipe. That's first world thinking. we've got to think more than that. We've got to think about the whole of planet Earth, not just what comes out the tailpipe of a passenger car. And it's not just passenger cars, by the way, as well. It's aeroplanes, it's freight, it's ships, it's rail, all of those things. But the politicians have done as they normally do. They go direct after the consumer, the person who's driving it, the social mobility. That's just not fair. Just not fair. Which is why retailers and brand partners must work together to get through this period of change.
Yeah, no, you're right. It's going to be an interesting year. So we could talk about this all day, couldn't we, Matt? To be fair, but yeah. So I just want to share, say thanks for joining us this morning. It's been a fantastic interview and sharing some thoughts on obviously Cambria's performance, and obviously thinking around those challenges, and as you say, these challenges and the headwinds actually do create opportunities as well, particularly now as we go into the new year. So it's been an absolute pleasure, and I just want to wish you and everybody a happy Christmas and a happy New Year from us guys at the podcast as well.
Phil, Curtis, as always, a pleasure, and happy Christmas and prosperous New Year to listeners as well, and look forward to talking to you in the new year.
Definitely.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mark.
Cheers, guys.
Cheers, mate. Cheers, mate.
Thanks, Mark. Well, Phil, fascinating interview there.
Yeah, we nearly got into Greco Bowbird's world then, didn't we?
Well, yes. Great insight into what's going on at the moment, and also the sort of future thinking, especially around those the emissions legislation and how that could potentially impact pre-reg fees, car sales. A lot going on, lots of. This year started with plenty of headwinds, but it looks as though 2020 will be just the same.
What is interesting though is that you're talking to a CEO there that is looking at the wider picture. He's looking at the industry as a whole. He's not looking at just his own business. He's looking at that relationship with the brand partners. He's looking at how that impacts on his, as Cambria have always done, the customers. They call them guests of the business, and that's what they do. That's their ethos with their customers. They are guests. So it's great that you're getting a CEO and other CEOs alike that are actually thinking about that. They're thinking about the emissions. They're thinking about their impact on the ozone and everything else. So it's great to get that. So we could fill the full show with it, couldn't we, to be fair? But anyway.
We could. And I thought it was particularly interesting what he was saying about that sort of migration into high-end luxury and what a slow burn it is. So those conversations that he was having with the manufacturers, they're 6, 7, 8 years ago. Yeah. And it takes that time to actually get up and running and representing some of these brands. So it just shows what foresight actually the guys at Cambria had 6, 7 years ago when they were thinking about that top end part of the market and moving into that.
Exactly. So headlines.
So look, we better get on with the show. So yes, headlines this week. We've, as I said earlier, we've got the new car registrations for November. Cazoo have launched in the UK. That was announced this week. We've got a roundup of the NFDA EV dealer attitude survey and who's up and who's down in that, which sort of follows on from what Mark was saying about relationships between dealers and OEMs. So, that's very pertinent there. We've got VW Group's Dieselgate class action hitting the UK. And finally, this week it's a music themed one, and the sort of music you shouldn't be listening to in the car over Christmas.
Exactly. So the first headline is that the new car registrations, and we'll have to try and get through a lot of these because we'll be a long show this morning if not, and there's probably people doing their last minute Christmas shopping if we're not careful. But I think from a new car registration point that we've gone straight to motortrader.com, and new car registrations fall 1.3% and private demand is down by 6.1%. So again, I think the fact that we've gone into November 1.3% down, which is similar to what we were last month in October. So we've come out with 156,000 registrations, and obviously the shift continues away from diesel. With another 27.2% fall in sales in the month of November. So again, what's your thought on this one? Because we've had that shift of private registrations, again, probably relating to what Mark was just going through there around that political uncertainty. But again, we've seen some growth in alternative fuel and EV.
Yeah, the standouts for me were really looking at private fleet and business. A pretty good month for fleet because it was actually up 2.8%. Private was down 6.1% and business down 3.2%. So again, it just shows how strongly fleet has, how consistent the fleet performance has really been throughout the year. So fleet is currently accounting for, well, it's 53% of the market, with private 44.6 and business picking up 2.6. So in terms of performance over the course of the months, as you say, it is interesting what's happening in EVs, because EV registrations were up. I mean, these are ridiculous figures, but and require some context. But pure EVs were up 228% in the month. So that's from 1,400 registrations November last year to just over 4,500 this year, and it really is just showing the way that that part of the market is actually moving. And also worth talking about hybrids, because they were up 15% in the month, and that from 6,000 to 7,000. So again, not massive figures, but it just shows the direction that these alternative fueled vehicles are actually moving in.
Yeah, and I think touching on, again with what Mark was just saying there from Cambria, that, and we've been talking about it this week at an EV marketplace that I've attended this week, that, January, when the new cafe legislation hits, then that's when we're going to start to see those sort of EV models come into the sector in higher volumes, because that's when they count and pay towards the reducing that risk of fine from the manufacturers. So I think VW, and be careful I quote this, but I think VW talked about 70 new models coming in by 2028. So you can start to see that sort of influx now and the focus from the manufacturers in that EV sector, and it's been driven very quick. And essentially, you're not necessarily going to see a replacement of models. These are kind of additions to the current models. So again, we're going to see initially an increase in model lineup as the manufacturers put the EVs into the sector. So again, we've seen some heavy growth, as you quite rightly say. You've seen the three times growth there in pure EV plugins and things like that. So we're going to see that even more next year, I suspect, as manufacturers really push hard for that EV sector.
Yeah, now I know we'll try and speed through some of the headlines this week, but whilst we've been on air, we've actually had the new van registration figures in. So for November, the van market was actually down 9.6%, with most segments experiencing double-digit declines. But with pickups actually bucking the trend. So pickups are actually up 17.2%, and performance year to date, the light commercial market is actually up 1.9%. So that's a quick roundup of what's happening in the van sector.
And moving on to the next story, this has been a topic of conversation for some time.
Yes.
in the media. It really did heat up last week as the rumours came out that Cazoo, after a lot of early noise in terms of the backing, the investment and the entrance into the sector and how they were going to come to the market, and then nothing really happened as they were building things. And there's a lot of conversations back end of last week around, does anyone know when they're launching, etc. And then the news broke, I think, think on Sunday evening that they were about.
Yeah, you're right. Auto Retail Network had the scoop on that.
Yeah, and they were going to launch on the Monday, Tuesday potentially, and they did. And this story is on AM Online that we've picked up, and the headline is Cazoo launches online used car retail platform with £80 million backing. And there's still a lot of conversation around this because everybody's watching the volume of vehicles that they've started off with, the fact that they are appearing on platforms such as Auto Trader, and to see where all this is starting to head now and what impact they will have on the sector.
Yeah, and you're right. This is an interesting launch, and the person behind it is Alex Chesterman, who's the founder of Love Film and Zoopla. So he does have some form in the digital marketplace. So what we're seeing here is that they've collaborated with BCA, so they've hit the ground running with 1,500 vehicles in stock, and it's an interesting time for this part of the market because we've already seen BCA launching their Cinch service and the VW Daimler Heycar platforms, but this is direct to sellers. So rather than being a sort of online portal, this is selling direct to end users.
Yeah, and as you can imagine, there's a lot of noise coming out of the dealers, both groups and independents, of how it's going to work, what where they're going to get the product from going forward long term. We know there's a as Mark Lavery's been talking about right at the start of the show there, and this used car investment, used car growth, the necessity now potentially with the headwinds facing the new car market, the demand on that used car, and every dealer group we've talked about it now on the podcast on a very regular basis, this investment into used cars. So it's not as if the retail dealer network isn't really focused on used cars and the consumers haven't got anywhere. The consumers can go onto an online platform, be it some of the large dealer groups. We talk about omni-channels, we talk about this whole end-to-end purchase of a used car as well as a new car that they can now do. And we've spoke recently around through a survey that I was involved with at Cox Automotive, that heavy investment into that online transactional investment that dealers are doing. So there's a lot of cynicism about it at the minute, and whether what longevity it's got in the market. But again, it's a disruption to the market, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And there was some interesting comments on social media in response to Alex Chesterman's quote, which he said, used cars are one of the last remaining consumer markets yet to benefit from any digital transformation. Well, I'm not sure I'd agree with that. No. There's plenty going on out there. I mean, only a couple of weeks ago, we were talking to Stuart Folds at Trust Ford, who have launched an online used car service. And Virtue, they launched one 4 or 5 years ago. So, there is a lot going on there. I think, my take on this is that potentially it will get buyers thinking about buying used cars online, which maybe they haven't considered that before. So if Cazoo do actually put a lot of marketing behind the launch, which one assumes they will, then maybe it'll just get buyers thinking about alternative ways to buy used cars. Yeah,
it's going to be one to watch, and there's obviously there's a level of investment there that we can quickly burn through, but it's an expensive marketplace to enter into, that consumer sector and that consumer marketing. But again, I'm sure we'll be keeping a close eye on this one as everybody else will be. So moving on, conscious of time on this one, that Renault and Nissan finish bottom of the NFDA EV dealer attitude survey. And again, any franchise dealer should have received a copy of this already from the NFDA. If you haven't, it's very well worth a read. I would suggest that you approach the NFDA and get yourself a copy, because it is very insightful. It's a very in-depth report that they do on a regular basis. And again, it's a shame, isn't it, that you've got those guys now finishing bottom of that attitude survey.
Yeah, and reading the piece on AM, it seems though that the problem lies with the dealers and reselling vehicles to existing EV customers. So you're right. With Nissan, the Leaf and Renault, the Zoe, they're the top two selling EVs in the UK at the moment. But dealers aren't that confident about selling new models to existing customers. There appears to be some sort of pushback there, and that's how they've dropped down the ratings.
Yeah. Again, I suppose it's a bit. We talked about earlier on about that entrance of the EV sector, the volumes of vehicles that are coming into that sector now as we move forward. It is going to be, obviously, the NFDA are very much behind this with some of the work that they're doing around the EV approved systems that they've got within the dealer network and some of the marketplace forums that they're holding. So again, as we start to see the growth and the entrance into this sector, it's going to be interesting to start to see how these sort of attitude surveys start to shift between the manufacturers, because people talk about the EV sector and it's less about some people might question this, but the brand loyalty in a way, because the EV is about what it does, the range, things like this, the charging, infrastructure support, etc., and less about that brand loyalty in some cases. But again, it's going to be one that we'll be watching very closely.
Yeah, and it's probably just worth highlighting that Toyota topped the rankings. In fact, they retained their lead, so they scored 9.2 out of a possible 10 points, followed by Kia, Volvo, Mitsubishi, and Mini. So there's the top five.
And the next story, staying with AM Online, and this is an interview actually that myself and Owen Edwards from Grant Thornton did with AM, and this was on the back of the recent breakfast meetings that were held, and talking around some of the challenges, some of the forecasts of the market, and really the headline is that time to review costs, investment and used car processes. And similar to what we were talking about before with the used car marketplace, similar to what Mark was talking about, that investment, that brand partner and that cost control and things like this. So this is where we talk about the forecast into the year. We are talking, we covered it last week, around that sort of 10 million transactions taking place in terms of the new and used car market for 2019. Owen at Grant Thornton talks obviously around that sort of growth of the autonomous vehicles and that EV sector and the way that is moving. And they're talking about that electric vehicles will also have and obviously a future impact on how vehicles are made and serviced. And Owen talks through the release there of what that impact could be, because we know that an EV needs less, it's got less moving parts, therefore needs less after sales and less sort of parts for maintaining that vehicle. So it's going to have an impact on the sector in terms of that after sales marketplace. And again, referring back to Mark right at the start of the show about that, the after sales opportunities and growth in terms of after sales revenue, but at the same time you're facing this headwind coming from this growth of EV into the sector. But we are still looking at a 37 million used vehicle park, aren't we, that is dominated by your petrol and diesel product.
Yeah, and Owen also points out that whilst the UK market has remained weak, it's important to take into consideration international markets, because sales were also in decline significantly across many European countries, the US and China. So, it's not a localized issue here. The international car market is under pressure.
Yeah, and it's great. I mean, the final comment for me on in the story, and actually, relates to Mark earlier on, is we talk about that, dealer consolidation, market disruption, and increased opportunities for online transaction, would be my standout, and it still is. We are going through this period of change. within the dealer market, the market in general. We talked about that kazoo earlier on and things like this, and that we are going to start to see this world of change, around that online transactional world as well. So certainly it's never going to become boring, is it?
No, not at all. Now, if you've just stumbled across us, you're listening to the Motor Trade Radio podcast in association with eBay Motors Group, the only weekly podcast serving the car retailing sector. And
about the, we're talking about dealers now in terms of 2020, and the next story is on motortrader.com, and the headline is "Dealers optimistic about used car prospects in 2020." And interesting, it's like Mark's read our headlines for the week, wasn't it, before the show? Yes. But this is actually from Startline that we've mentioned a couple of times on the podcast, and we had on earlier on that. They're talking about nearly a third, 29.1%, see the market as unchanging, and just over a fifth, 22.8%, predict limited negative growth, according to research from Startline Motor Finance. And they're talking about that optimism in terms of that used car sector in the next 12 to 18 months, that over half believe that the market will see growth.
Yeah, and there's a lovely quote here from Paul Burgess, who, as you mentioned, we had on the podcast a month or so ago. And he says, one of the truisms of the motor industry is that even when times are difficult, people still need cars to live and to work. And even when new car sales suffer, used sales tend to be resilient. So it really does back up what, as you say, what Mark was saying in the interview. So it's a good positive story here about potential for the used car market next year and beyond.
Yeah, and you mentioned at the start of the show, again, Dieselgate, the longest running hashtag in history of social media, continues.
It's come to the UK.
It's made its way onto the BBC News headlines this week as well, and the headline is that UK drivers fight for Dieselgate compensation. And I think this was kind of raised, it said a few times, the whole compensation around the Dieselgate scandal, and the opening paragraph is that Volkswagen cheated European emission rules designed to save lives by installing unlawful defeat devices in diesel cars, the High Court has heard. There's a lot of inverted commas there, isn't there?
And a nice bit of alliteration as well. Defeat devices, diesel cars. Yes. So this is the class action. So there's it's really 10,000 UK motorists have brought this case against Volkswagen, Audi, Seat and Skoda, and all regarding diesel cars. And there's some strongly worded arguments on both sides of this, in that the QC looking after the claimants, Tom de la Mare, said it is difficult to think of a more obvious cheat than the one Volkswagen used, whilst VW's barrister Michael Fordham QC argued in written submissions that the claimants had misunderstood the legal definition of a defeat device. So this one is going to run and run, and it could actually take 2 to 3 years before the outcome is known. So we'll give regular updates as and when. How's that?
Yeah, we'll go through it in a little bit more detail on another podcast. If not, it'll be people will be shouting in that they don't have time to listen to it all today. And we've got a lovely kind of unfiling, an interesting one really. So again, coming from our guys at Motoring Research, and again you mentioned it right at the start there that drivers should stop listening to Girls Aloud. It's an interesting headline, isn't it? So, and they're talking to a recent study from America, saying that they found that songs with more than 120 beats per minute, I've never thought about that, resulted in a faster and more erratic driving. And to stay safe, drivers should listen to music that is what mimics the human heartbeat. Yeah. Ideally songs with 60 to 100 beats per minute. Is that how you select your Spotify playlist? I'm not sure I do.
Well, yeah. I guess that anyone sort of driving home for Christmas needs to factor this one in, because they've supplied a rather handy top 10 of the most dangerous Christmas number ones. I won't do the whole top 10, but I will point out that Benny Hill's Ernie was at number 10, which I remember buying. But number 5, we've got Slade, Merry Christmas Everybody. Number 4, The Beatles, Day Tripper. Number 3, Pet Shop Boys, Always on My Mind. I don't remember that being particularly fast. Number 2, Lad Baby, your favourites. We Built This City. And number 1, Girls Aloud, Sound of the Underground. So, well, it's official. Girls Aloud is potentially bad for your health. So try not to listen to them over Christmas, guys.
Yeah, we'll see on that one. I'm going to play that Pet Shop Boys one, and just it didn't, like you say, it didn't seem that fast. I can understand one or two others, although I don't want to admit that, Girls Aloud, Spice Girls are on my playlist, and Benny Hill's definitely not on my playlist. It's always a good one when it does come on, but it's not a regular drive home song choice, if I'm perfectly honest with you. Anyway, they should be listening to the podcast anyway, shouldn't they, Curtis?
Well, absolutely, yes, yeah. In fact, you're right. And I should have told you what the safest Christmas number one to listen to is, because I challenge anyone to remember this one, but number 1 was Frankie Lane, Answer Me. So there you go.
Right, okay, that's see if that ups on the playlist song choice for Christmas, but we'll see. So that's it. It's been a long one today, hasn't it, Curtis? So we've had a great interview there with Mark, and as you can imagine, we could have talked to Mark for a lot longer this morning, but hopefully we're getting back on in the new year and sort of discuss some other subjects with Mark at some point in the new year. So I think that's it for us, isn't it, this week now, Curtis?
It is, yes. That wraps it for this week. We'll be putting together more headlines for next week. So, just to sign off, you've been listening to the Motor Trade Radio podcast in association with eBay Motors Group. We are the only weekly podcast serving the car retailing sector, and available online at motortraderadio.com and by subscribing on iTunes, Google Play, Deezer, SoundCloud, and YouTube.
And others, but yeah, great.
Yes, and others.
Yeah, there is that. So, brilliant. Thanks again for tuning in this week, everybody, and hope you found it interesting. I would suggest that we rattle through some of them headlines very quickly, but head over to some of the places there to have a look. BBC News there, Motor Trader, AM Online, and of course our guys at Motoring Research, and let's not forget Auto Retail Network as well, that brought the Kazoo story on Sunday evening there. So head over, have a check. There's those are the platforms to go and have a look at some of the news in more detail, and some of the headlines that are hitting on a regular basis. So that's it for this week, and we are returning next week. We are going right up until Christmas, so tune in again next week. And as always, if you want to come on and you want to share some of your thoughts on interesting insight into the sector, please get in touch and you're welcome on. Thanks,
okay,
Curtis.
Well, thank you. It's goodbye from me, and it's goodbye from him.
That's it.